Welcome to the Grow Down on Soil Health, the podcast where we dig deep into sustainable farming practices that can enhance your land and your bottom line. I'm your host, Dr. Ben West, Executive Director of Farmers for Soil Health, a program dedicated to improving soil health practices like planting cover crops. Today's episode explores how farmers across the United States approach cover crops and why adoption is often a gradual process rather than a simple yes or no decision. We'll discuss the different ways farmers use cover crops, what influences their decisions, and how their experiences, backgrounds, and farming goals shape the way they think about soil health and conservation. Today, joining me is Dr. Maria Teresa Tancredi, a soil health specialist with the Conservation Technology Information Center and a Farmers for Soil Health Minnesota technical advisor, whose research focuses on how row crop farmers across the Midwest, Southeast, and Northeast think about commodity agriculture and how conservation practices such as cover crops fit in their views and their operations. Thanks for joining us today, Maria Teresa.
Thank you, Ben, and you can call me Maria.
Okay, Maria. So, Maria, you're from Italy. You grew up in Italy.
Yes, I am.
You grew up in a rural farming community.
Mm-hmm.
So tell us about that. What was it like to grow up there? How did your experiences there influence, your career path?
Yeah, so I grew up, like you said, in central Italy on a small homestead farm. My grandma and my parents still live there, actually. And I don't know, maybe just like a lot of farm kids, I didn't realize how cool it was to grow up on a farm, until I actually moved for college. And I was like, oh man, now I actually need to go to the grocery store. I can't just ask grandma where are the eggs and go outside and pick some vegetables. So that was interesting. But yeah, like I guess going to college and maybe taking a step back made me realize that agriculture is actually a really important field, pun not intended. And it's really fascinating. And so I decided that I wanted to learn more. And so I kept going through for grad school, trying to get the answer to some questions.
Yeah, and as we were talking about before we started taping, I spent a couple weeks in Italy a couple of years ago, my only time to your country, in Cortona, a small town in the middle of a pretty heavy agricultural region. And I was really struck during my time there of how how close Italians are to the land. Every meal that I had, there was this close connection to the land. I remember the little cabin that we stayed at. The owner, when we got there, had come in from the woods harvesting mushrooms, and that was part of the meal that night. It had to be really inspirational to grow up in a place where people were so connected to the land and to where their food comes from.
Yeah, it's really, I think, it's been really impactful. I think there's a little bit this stereotype that in a way it's true that Italians are kind of obsessed with food, and we think that, what we have is absolutely the best always and ever. And we get really mad when, people put pineapple on pizza. But
I do too, by the way. I think those people are communists. No.
But I do think it's because for like a lot of Italy, especially a lot of Italy that it's still rural, there are very close connections. And in a way, it's, for many people in the US too, like a lot of folks are maybe just a couple of generations far removed from agriculture, and a lot of family traditions and family cultures are built around the table and are built around food. And so I think, one of the, nicest memories that I have of growing up on my farm is like going around with my grandma foraging for like wild chicories and other herbs to cook around. And so, we're a little obsessed.
And that had to influence how you think about agriculture today.
It does. It does a lot. It's really interesting to live in the US now and work in the like agriculture space here, because in a way, production is very similar and very different. I think one of the things that Italy realized at some point and is trying to make its strength is that we have so many regional products. And so we have a lot more of like niche production. And a lot of it is also because of what our country looks like. Like I was curious and I looked up these numbers because farmers always ask me when they find out about it, like the average size of a farm in the region where I grew up is about 30 acres. The average size of a farm where I live now, which is in the Red River Valley of Minnesota, it's closer to 2,000 acres.
Right.
And so that also has a big impact on like what people can grow and how and the way people relate to agriculture.
And some of that's probably the commodity. I know where you grew up, sugar beets were really common.
Yes, they used to be. We were actually, the region where I came from was, I think the second in Italy for sugar beet production until like the early 2000s. And then there was some shifting around and some changing of priorities at the European and national level. And we don't really grow sugar beets anymore. And so it's been really fun to move back to a place where sugar beets are such an important crop and just trying to learn more about it. Cause I guess when we stopped growing sugar beets in Italy, I was like a preteen. So again, I was in that phase of my life where I didn't realize that I had to pay attention at what was around me. So I'm trying to learn about it now.
Yeah, because Minnesota is one of the largest sugar beet producers in the country, maybe the largest.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think, again, the Red River Valley, so part of Minnesota and North Dakota, I'm pretty sure leading production of sugar beets.
But I'm assuming in Italy, a lot of small specialty crops, too,
yes.
Which is why you had such small farms.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. There's a lot of grapes. We have a lot of different kinds of cereal. We have lots of honeybees. Sheep production is still really big. But yeah, there's a lot of very niche localized productions for sure.
And when you went to college, when you started your academic career, undergraduate, agriculture was not on your radar.
Not really. I was one of those kids that wanted to save the world. And I was like, I'm going to go into environmental sciences. I want to save the bees and the trees and the flowers. And I didn't realize at first that agriculture can play a big role in actually protecting some of the environmental resources that we have. I kind of stepped into it as like, it's like we have all this land into agriculture. Maybe we're doing things wrong. And then I got to learn more about it. The project that really opened my eyes was this research project that I got to do as my undergraduate, sort of like small thesis. And it was all about these pastures that we have in the Alps in Italy, France, Switzerland, that are pastures that are very high on the mountains because for centuries, people have brought up cattle up there and manicured in a way the landscape. And so now we have all of this diversity as far as plants and insects that we wouldn't have if it wasn't for agriculture. And actually now the task is how do we continue doing that to preserve that biodiversity? Because this is a type of practice that is actually kind of disappearing because it takes a lot of time and a lot of work. And it's unfortunately not always, as it often is in agriculture, that profitable. And so now the question is like, how do we use agriculture to help preserve this biodiversity and these resources that we have and this sort of like, postcard idea that we have of the Alps?
Right. And it's fast. I'm a wildlife biologist, and it's been really interesting to me the past few years. I've gotten more interested and involved in prairie restoration in the southeastern U.S. we think of as forested today. But before Europeans arrived, there was a lot of prairie because we had a lot of fire and big grazing animals. And there's some groups now really looking at using livestock as a surrogate for bison, for big grazing animals to try and recreate these disturbance regimes that created, prairies in the Southeast. Yeah,
I think one of the professors that taught me in undergrad had this great point that was like, what we think of natural, what does natural even mean? Because humans have been interacting and modifying the environment around us for so long that kind of, like you said, like some of those systems were in place because, also of things that we were doing.
Right. So you want to save the world, you got into an environmental science degree, saw an opportunity to leverage agriculture to do that, and came to the States for your graduate work. How did that happen? And what did you do for your master's and your PhD?
Yeah, so for my master's, when I finished my undergraduate degree, I decided to go in a master's in sustainable agriculture because, again, I wanted to learn more. And I was very lucky because the university where I was at, which is the University of Padua, had this dual degree program with the University of Georgia, where basically you could do half of your degree in your university of origin, do the other half in the other state, in the other country, I should say, and graduate with 2 degrees in one. It was like a 2-in-1 kind of deal. And I was like, well, this sounds fun. I get to go live in the U.S. for, about a year, have a stipend. I get to study. I was like, sure, why not? And so I came over. The project that I ended up working on was a little bit different. It was on soil physics and hydrology. We were looking at water and nutrient movement. It wasn't really ag related, but I got the chance to continue taking classes. And I took this one class that was really fascinating to me that was on basically the social impacts and the social dimensions of agriculture and food systems with this professor at the University of Georgia named Dr. Jennifer Jo Thompson. And that's where kind of like another bulb clicked in my head. And I was like, okay, so I want to save the world. Agriculture is part of it. Okay, so we need the farmers. So we need to figure out how to work people in. And so Dr. Thompson is a trained anthropologist, but she works in the Department of Crop and Soil Sciences. And I approached her and I was kind of naive, but it worked out. I was like, hey, I love what you do. I'd love to learn more about it. Can I do a PhD with you? And it worked out. And so got to stay in the U.S. for a little bit longer.
Yeah, how cool. So you've been here. How long have you been in the U.S. now?
It's been a little over 7 years. I moved here at the beginning of 2019.
Yeah. And so what surprised you the most about U.S. agriculture coming from a rural, rural background in Italy to working in agriculture here?
Again, the size of farms, it's still mind-boggling to me sometimes to think how big the United States are. Yes. Like even now that I work in Minnesota and I cover most of the state as a TA for Farmers for Soil Health, it's like I forget that it's a big state and it takes a long time to go around. And so, like farm size is really, really interesting. And I think part of it is also like, partly maybe because of the farm size, like the scale at which farmers work. And I think I can see a lot more, and maybe it's just because I'm paying attention, but like how the commodity markets and like where you are, how it impacts what you grow on your farm and how you grow it and all those kinds of things. And so I think that, and also like I said, when I first came over, I was at the University of Georgia and I loved learning about peanuts and cotton because those are 2 crops that we don't really grow that much in Italy, definitely never grown in the area where I come from. And so it was just really fascinating to learn more about those crops.
Very, very cool. So I want to talk about your research and what that means for cover crops and for farmers in the United States. But before we dig into that, let's talk about Farmers for Soil Health. This is a program established by farmers for farmers and focuses on strengthening soil health practices like planting cover crops to enhance the environment and profitability of farmers. Through this podcast, which is in partnership with the Soy Checkoff, Pork Checkoff, and National Corn Growers Association, we dig deep into sustainable farming practices. We're bringing you tangible, experience-based, and research-backed information that can help you enhance your land and your bottom line. If you're enjoying this so far, check out our other episodes. So Maria, you moved here to work on your master's and PhD. Mm-hmm. Now working for CTIC as one of our technical service advisors. Mm-hmm. Working with a lot of farmers. You've really been thinking about cover crops and not just the agronomic perspective of cover crops, but also the social science perspectives. Like, what is it that causes a farmer to adopt or to not adopt cover crops or any sustainability practice? So, high level, If I were to come to you and ask you what makes a farmer choose which sustainability practices to use and why, what's the answer?
I'm going to be a little cheesy and use the answer that my Ph.D. advisor loved, that I learned to be really true, and it depends. It always depends. Because the question is like, okay, where is that farmer? Like physically, geographically, where are they? What are they growing? What are their goals? Because I think one of the things that, sometimes we forget, because we talk about farmers, is like, farmers are just like every one of us. They're not all the same just because they all do the same job. Like, sure, they probably share, they might share a lot of values, but not necessarily. They might share a lot of the same issues and risks and benefits. But again, each farmer is a different individual. And so I think sometimes we try to simplify the answer to that question a little too much, and we try to look for that silver bullet and be like, if I could only let every farmer know that cover crops are good for this one thing, then everybody would come on board. And I think that cuts us short, because especially again, when we're talking about cover crops and other conservation practices, cover crops have so many benefits. And so I think it's really a matter of trying to understand what does the farmer in front of me care about? What are they trying to get out of this? Are they new to the practice? Are they not new to the practice? How willing are they to take risk? Because even farmers who are very risk averse, I found in my research, are very willing potentially to use cover crops on their farm. They're just going to go about it in a different way. They're not going to be like, sure, I'm going to just year one do my entire farm and use a cover crop mix and plant green and try to kill my cover crop with a roller crimper.
Yes.
Like that is not what's going to happen. This is probably going to be a farmer that's going to be like, okay, I'm going to choose this one field that it's maybe near my house so I can keep an eye on it, and I'm going to do the simple thing, and I'm going to just try it out. And so I think it really depends on what the person in front of us is looking for and what they also have available to work with.
But even how we talk about it, those of us in the profession, how we talk about it doesn't really reflect reality. I mean, we tend to talk about farmers, either they're cover crop farmers or they're not.
Right.
But as we were talking about, it's really not that simple, and it's more of a continuum.
It is. It absolutely is. And I think it's because farmers every year have to deal with so much uncertainty, and also it's like every year they're doing something different. I mean, sure, there are some farmers that do corn on corn on corn on corn for like 30 years in a row, but generally they have a rotation, and we encourage them to have a rotation. And so every year, for example, depending on the cash crop that they have on that field or that they're going to have on that field that next year, the species of cover crop that they might plant might change. It might be a very dry year, and so farmers might decide, I can't really plant a cover crop this year because of this reason, or economic markets are kind of tight right now. And so farmers might have to decide, like, I love this practice, I would love to do it, but I just can't afford to do it. And I mean, not to toot our horn, but this is kind of like where programs like our own can come and help farmers, especially on that financial side. But the way I try to think of farmers and their use of cover crops is more like a process. It's almost like a decision that is renegotiated year after year, not because they don't see the value of the practice, but because again, the conditions around the change. And so how much of their acres they might cover crop, how they're going to do it, when they're going to do it, whether they're going to do it or not, it might change. And just because someone uses cover crop once, we shouldn't assume that they're all set and now we can just walk away and they've got it all figured out. But also just because they've had a bad experience one year, we maybe need to figure out a way to see can we get them to try it again? Can we figure out what it is that went wrong? And shouldn't also just give up on them.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course there are farmers who have been using cover crops for many years, and they're diehard. Now they use it
absolutely.
on every field every year, and that's something unexpected happens. You have a lot of farmers like you've talked about. Some years they do, some years they don't. Every year is a decision. But then there's a lot of farmers who have never used cover crops.
Yeah.
And I know you've studied those farmers and tried to understand what are the barriers that keep them from trying this new practice, which empirically the research is pretty solid. It brings a wide variety of benefits to most farms in most situations. So those farmers who have never tried them before, despite all the technical science-based information about their benefits, what are the barriers for those farmers?
Again, I think it really depends on the farmer, but I can give you a couple examples. So, I've had some conversations both during my research and as I've been working now as a TA in Minnesota. I've had several folks come up to me and be like, I just don't have the right equipment for it. I feel like I need a drill, and I'm going to have to drill my cover crop if I want to even have a chance to go about this. And so I think, we have to get a little bit more creative and in thinking with the farmers and be like, okay, you don't have a drill. You don't want to buy a drill just to plant your cover crops. I get it. What do you have in your shed? Can we figure out something that you already have that you can use? Or maybe you don't have the time or the labor. Okay, is there like an aerial applicator around you that can do that work for you? Or is there a farmer that will come plant that cover crop for you? So a lot of times I think it's like for the farmers is getting worried that they don't have the exact thing and getting caught up in that without maybe realizing that there is not one way to do cover crops. There's not one right way. And so we can get creative together. And I think something else that we can do as like technical advisors is connect farmers together, connect them to someone that like have figured it out and found the ways to retrofit what they have in their farm. I've learned that farmers love to be mechanics and retrofit their equipment. And so it's like, how can we help you be creative with what you have? Another barrier, and what I found was really interesting, it seemed to be a lot more relevant in the Midwest, for example, rather than the Southeast or the Northeast, was land tenure. I think a lot of people talk about cover crops being a long-term investment, and then we're seeing more and more one-year leases. And so I can see where some farmers are hesitant to invest money in a field that they're not sure that they're going to be able to farm the next year and, actually reap those benefits. They're like, again, maybe markets are tight. It's hard to be profitable. Why should I be spending money to make this field better that I won't even necessarily get to farm next year? And so I think that's where, bringing in landowners in the conversation is going to be really important. But also there are some benefits that can show up year one. It is not all about long term. And so again, it comes to like, what is your situation? Is there a way to work around it? Sometimes, we're really lucky in Minnesota. There's almost so many different incentive programs that it gets overwhelming for farmers to choose what's there.
Yes.
But not every state is like that. And sometimes, farmers are really busy. They have a lot of things to think about, and finding a place to know what is out there for them is hard, especially if they're not already like well connected. Maybe they're with their local NRCS office or their soil and water conservation office. And so they might not know that programs are out there available for them to help them, support them both financially and technically, so that hopefully they have a good experience. And so I would say, like, yeah, if farmers have a chance, go talk to your FSA office, go talk to they're called differently on the states, but basically your soil and water conservation district. Again, this is sort of like a bit of an ad in the podcast, but like CTIC created something called Conservation Connector. We launched it last year. It's a free website where farmers can go filter down actually all the way to their county and see what programs are there and are available to them. And so I would say, peer pressure can be another big one. You don't want to be the only one.
Wait a second. I want to go back to the Conservation Connector.
Sure.
You may not want to promote it since you work for CTIC, but I'll promote it because it's a fantastic resource. So how do farmers find that?
Yeah, so you just open your browser of choice, so Google, Safari, Firefox, whatever you use, and you just type in either Conservation Connector or connector.ag, that is AG, just in agriculture. And again, it's a free website, and it has sort of two functions. One is looking for programs. And so again, it's not just about cover crops. There are programs that span a variety of conservation practices, and you can filter by state, you can filter by county, and see which programs are available to you. And then there's also another feature, which is looking for providers. And so that's how farmers can find, for example, someone that has a drone company in the area that could plant the cover crop or spray the cover crop to terminate it with herbicides. And actually, it is also free for both programs and providers to add themselves to the website so that farmers can find them. So I would say if you're listening and you're a provider, go add yourself to the Conservation Connector so that farmers can find you. It
is a great resource. I encourage everyone, regardless whether you're a farmer or a provider, to visit it. You mentioned something I think is interesting, and that is that some benefits of cover crops take a while to accumulate. Mm-hmm. You know, we've had Dr. Rob Myers on the show before with the Center for Regenerative Agriculture. He's done a lot of research on this and has shown, things like, just for example, soil organic carbon.
Right.
Cover crops contribute to that, but it takes a while. Mm-hmm. You're not going to see a tremendous increase in year 1 or year 3. It may take several years. But you said some benefits can accrue quickly.
Yes.
What do you see, especially in Minnesota, the farmers you work with, but across the areas you've worked in, if a farmer's listening, they've never used cover crops before and they've been thinking about it. Maybe they're thinking about enrolling in Farmers for Soil Health this year. Mm-hmm. What would you tell them to expect in terms of the biggest benefits the first year or 2 or 3?
I mean, I would say the first one that comes to mind, soil erosion. Mm-hmm. Which can be both wind erosion or water erosion. If you farm in a part of the country that has even a little bit of slope, you get a heavy rain, if there's nothing on that soil is going to wash away. And it's going to wash away with it also all the nutrients that are left in it after you harvest your cash crop. Wind erosion, again, I live in the Red River Valley now. Wind is no joke up there.
Yes.
We get some very strong winds. A couple of weeks ago, we had a dust storm alert because it was so windy and there was so much soil, because that's what it is. There was so much soil blowing around, and I was actually very happy because I had a farmer call me and saying, I've been thinking about cover crops for a while, and the wind this week really encouraged me to give you a call. I think it's time for me to try these cover crops and see what I can do. Because, again, we don't think about it, but if we leave our soil bare, it doesn't take much, and sometimes, again, in the valley, we're well, things are flat. There's no erosion. Well, basically, there's always erosion, and especially with high winds. So,
especially with bare soil, right? It does not take much.
Yeah, so erosion is one, for sure. The other one, too, that is kind of a non-brainer for many of the farmers that I work with is if you have livestock, cover crops can be a great source of feed that can be a lot cheaper than growing alfalfa or hay. One of the farmers that I worked with for my research said this thing to me that I thought it was so brilliant. He was like, the cheapest feed I can feed my cows is food that they can eat themselves and that I don't have to bring to them. And so, he was saying I plant a cover crop and then I have my cattle graze that cover crop all fall long. And I don't have to be hauling around hay bales to the cattle. It's saving me time, it's saving me money, and the cattle is happy.
And probably no better way to accentuate the benefits of cover crops than put animals on there.
Absolutely, right? Yes, yeah. Yes.
So thinking about what are the factors that drive farmers to adopt certain practices or not to. I know where I live, I live in West Tennessee. We have very, very high adoption of no-till, very more than 90%. Very low adoption of cover crops. And I hear how farmers talk about each other, to each other. And, if a farmer is taking a little bit of a social risk in trying new practices because they become a topic of conversation around their neighbors. So, obviously there's a lot of things that influence what farmers do other than just economics.
Yes.
And other than just their technical knowledge about something. Talk a little bit about some of the more social things that influence what farmers do and what we should as professionals keep in mind as we're working with farmers.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a great question. So, peer pressure can be very important when it comes to adoption of practices like no-till, cover crops, and it can be both a positive and a negative, depending on sort of like the angle upon which it's coming onto the farmers. So, I'm sure you've heard this, like, at some point, no-till was referred to as trash farming.
Yes.
If you're a farmer, and like I've got to learn that like farmers really care about how their fields look like.
Yes.
Especially if they're renting that land, because the landowner might have feelings about
it, but
not
not how their neighbors talk about them at the coffee shop.
Right, exactly.
Right, yes,
and so like, I could see how if I was a farmer, I wouldn't want to do something that calls my field trash farming. And thankfully we've moved away from that name. Now we call it no-till. But again, something I've heard more people say, it's like no-till, no yield. So like we have these like catchy phrases that put some shame on some of these practices. It's this idea of like, you don't want to go against what like we sometimes call like social norms. It's like, you don't want to stick up like a sore thumb. You don't want to be the only one in your county, in your neighborhood that's doing the thing that's different. And some farmers don't care. Like I've had plenty of farmers tell me, my neighbors think I'm crazy. And the more crazy they say I am, the prouder I am. And the more I feel like what I'm doing is the right thing. But not everybody feels that way. Like sometimes trying something that is different can be hard because, you don't want to be talked about. You don't want to hear your neighbors talk about you saying like you're a bad steward just because you're doing something different. And so I think like part of the reason why more widespread adoption has been slow is I think because sometimes people are a little afraid. Again, I had farmers tell me like, the first time I did cover crops, I did it in the back 30 that's like far away from the road and nobody could see it. And so if it was like a terrible mistake, nobody could tell. And so I think as like technical providers, what we can do is, work with those farmers and be like, okay, you're the only one in this county. This is something you really want to try, but you feel alone. And also sometimes the being alone is not just a matter of, social pressure, but it's a matter of being like, I don't know how to do this necessarily. And I feel like when I have a problem, I can call up 3 people in my area and I can ask a question. But if I'm the only one here, if I have a problem, who am I going to talk? Because we know that like farmers have a lot of different trusted advisors, but a lot of times they love to hear from other farmers. Like the word of another farmer is gonna often carry a lot more weight than the word of someone else who's trying to advise them. Yeah. And so I think something that we can do is help get those farmers connected with other people that maybe are not quite exactly in their area, but that are close enough that can talk to them. And so, for example, again, as CTIC, we administer the Farmers for Soil Health program in Wisconsin, Minnesota, and South Dakota. We realized the importance of this peer support. And so we decided to have, as part of the component for the program for our state, a program called our cover crop coaches. So these are farmers that have long-term expertise with cover crops that live and farm in the 3 states where we administer the program and that are available to support, mentor, be a sounding board, you can call it whatever you want, other farmers in the state that are wanting to try this practice for the first time, or maybe that have been doing it for a long time, but feel like it's time to do something different. It's time to do something new. And they want to have someone there. And so I think, again, being a connection, maybe being the person that can connect these farmers can be really helpful as providers. And I would say like one thing that I've seen a lot, which makes me really happy, is I feel like all of the farmers that I've talked to that use these practices and are very passionate about them, they love to talk about their story. They are not afraid to talk about their mistakes. They talk about what can go wrong, because we often talk about the benefits of cover crops and we tend to shy away a little bit more about like, this could go wrong if you don't think about it. And so I would say, if you're a farmer, don't hesitate to reach out to other farmers that are using this practice. And what I've heard from farmers is you can learn a lot even from someone that farms 2 states over. Like their crops might be different, their environment might be different, but some of the ideas are going to translate. And there's starting to be more and more like farmers networks and sort of like grassroots farmers groups. And so I would say, look around you, see who's there, and don't be afraid to ask questions, because most farmers using these practices do want to help other farmers.
Yeah, and obviously there's a lot of people in our program and others like you and I that have technical training
Absolutely.
In these areas, but those farmer advisors understand the practical considerations of running a farm day to day that we don't have.
Exactly. Absolutely.
And, all right, so Maria, really appreciate you joining us. You're coming all the way from Italy.
Yes.
And spending some time with us today, and particularly helping us advance cover crops here in the United States and up in Minnesota. You guys are running a great program up there, and just really appreciate your time with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ben, for having me. And like farmers say, you have to come from at least 30 miles away or something like that to call yourself an expert. So I came all the way from across an ocean, and maybe that counts for something.
Yeah, but back when I was an extension specialist, I would always say my job was to fly in, fly off, and fly out.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's what we're doing here this week. Well, thanks again for joining us. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe, follow us on social media, and check out our website, farmersforsoilhealth.com, where you can find out more about our program and about how you can get involved. Stay tuned here for more insights on sustainable farming practices. Until next time.